Okay, so welcome back, folks. For those who've been following this first live stream I've been doing, it has not been free from gremlins. I'm still trying to figure my way out through this. It's crashed quite a few times. I'm doing a painting. I think this is a bit like, does anyone out there, make pancakes, right? You make up the pancake mixture and you do the first pancake. It's never quite that good, is it? It's what I call the first pancake, right? It's kind of all right, but it's not quite right. And the rest of them, they're all golden brown and look and taste lovely. So this is very much a first pancake. It's definitely not gone that smoothly, but we'll persevere. We'll see how we get on, and we'll get this painting finished. Depending on how it goes, what I might do is I might just download these videos, put them together in a video, and just present it as a tutorial, in and of itself, as opposed to a live stream. Anyway, wish me luck. We'll see how far we get, and away we go. So, as I mentioned, for those who are just coming across this video, I do implore you to look at the previous live streams, which I may put together. I'm creating a concept scene, which is based on, which is based on a previous illustration that I did here. It's so it's all in black and white. It's the characters kind of flying on a dragon into the distance, and yeah, so it's based on that, and I'm just doing a reproduction of that loosely. I mean, I'm not covering it absolutely to the letter, but anyway, so that's the idea with that. So I'm just going to continue. So where I got to the last time was I'd kind of blocked everything in. I put all the details in there, and what I was looking to do is to really start working into some of the detail. So this is where, because at the moment I've got it at 100 pixels, I'm going to up that now. I'm going to take that up there. So if I just bring that up there, there we go. So I'm going to take it from 100. I'm going to take it up to 200. So I'll take it up in stages. Yeah. Once I sort of take it up to 300, I'm not going to be able to work in broader terms. So once you kind of get to this stage, it's still a good sort of quality, but it means that when you're using things like the smudge tool, you can work in detail. It's just smooth. It's less pixelated. Essentially, this is what I'm trying to say. So I'm just looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, so basically what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to working with the lasso tool, and I'm just going to aim to use the gradient tool, change that over to white, take the opacity down, and just try and kind of add a bit more kind of body. Just try and create some depth. That's the general aim with this, is creating as much depth as I can with it. So as I mentioned before in the first part of this, when I first started the tutorial, is have an idea, but at the same time don't really think too much. What am I trying to say? Don't try and control things too much. Have fun, play around, make mistakes, yeah. Have those happy accidents. Don't aim to get it all 100% correct, yeah, because it ends up being pretty lifeless there. Let's just check the settings on that. Oh, no wonder I've got dynamics set up there. Yeah, it can get pretty lifeless if you do that. So try and have a sense of kind of fun when you're doing stuff. Have a sense of play. Try and steer away from being too controlling. So I'm just inverting this just so I can kind of put some little highlight, like there, say for example. Put some little highlights on there, and then I can invert it again, and this time just add some, I might just enlarge it a little bit, and just add some around there to make sure I still haven't got. No, that's all right. Okay. Okay, and then you can kind of smudge stuff out. So if you end up with a little line going on here, you can always just use the smudge tool and smudge it out. So again, as I mentioned before in the previous videos, you can go as detailed or not with a lot of this stuff. It's entirely up to you. It depends on what kind of time you've got. If you're working for I don't know, if you're working on a movie, or if you're working in the games industry, in fact, it's probably the same for both. You don't really have a lot of time. Time's quite tight, and so you don't have the luxury. For those of you like going to things like ArtStation, and there's some wonderful work on there, really amazing work. And I can see when I go on there, I can tell there's just like a ton of time that's gone into it. And I think for students kind of wanting to build up a really kick-ass type of portfolio, yeah, of course, but there is the thing of time, and once you sort of get into the industry, you'll find you don't have that luxury of time anymore. Things, it's a pretty fast turnaround. That was from my experience working in the film industry, and from people that I know who work in the games industry, people I talk to, it's pretty much the same thing. You've got a quick turnaround. There's not a lot of time to kind of put that level of detail, depending on what it is, but generally speaking, to put that level of detail into your work, you don't really have it. So what I'm doing here is I'm just using the shift tool, and I'm just sketching into this now. So again, very loose. Yeah, I did that thing with the lasso tool earlier. Now I'm just using the brush tool, put in like a suggestion of some kind of like water in there. We've got this in there. I'm imagining the sort of sun shining on there and sort of creating a haze. So what I'm thinking of doing is I might just switch that brush up now to the soft brush, like so. And what I'll do is so imagine the lights bouncing off the water. I might just take that down a little bit. And if it bounces off, it's going to create this kind of glare almost, right? Perhaps not that much. That's a bit more like I don't know, it's a bit too much of a blast. But let me just take this down just a smidgen. So something like that. And if you want to, I might just put this on another layer, because if you're trying something out for the first time and you don't know if it's going to work, it's a good idea often just to try it on another layer. So if it goes wrong, and you don't have to suffer the consequences. This is the beauty of Photoshop, right? You can have another try at it. So I'm going to have these kind of like beams of light. Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do first. I've got it on a separate layer, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create. First of all, I'm going to do this. There is some method in my madness, right? So I'm just going to do these using the Shift key. I'm just going to kind of create these lines. Oops, I didn't want that. Take that back up to the top. I'm going to create these lines, various kind of thicknesses, like so. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the filter, blur, and motion blur. And what you can do with that is, if I just bring this up to the top, you can you've got a little kind of dial here, and it can basically blur it which way you like, diagonally. I mean, really any angle. I'm just going to do this straight down, and I'm just going to increase the distance. So you can see there, can you see that? It's basically, yeah, that's something more like what I was kind of looking for, something like that. And I'm going to click OK on that. And now what I can do is I can use the Control T or Command T and take that down like so. And then have that, you know, as if it's kind of coming through the heavens. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. And I can use the smudge tool on that and just phase that a little bit. And if it's a little bit strong, so you can see it, you could, if you want, I mean, I'm going to go to filter again, blur. This time use Gaussian blur. If you find it's a little bit too strong, you can always just sort of take the edge off a wee bit, if you want. It depends what you're after. I think that's kind of looking okay. Yeah. Again, you can play around with this. I'm going to click OK on that, and I'm going to use the soft brush eraser. Excuse me. And oops, a little bit strong. I'm just going to take that down from 100%. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to oh, I thought I just took that down. Let's try that again. There we go. Just have it so it's a little bit. I mean, you could, if you want, you could take the opacity down like so, but I don't want to do that. I'd rather have a bit more control on it and just add some little details in there, just so you kind of got that nice effect kind of going on the water. All right, so it's shaping up nicely. Again, you know, I'm just going to zoom in slightly now. You got all these other. If I just zoom in a bit there, you can see these things in the distance now. Again, you know, you can work in. I'm just going to collapse that layer down onto there. You can, you know, add some peaks in there. You know, start to kind of add some details. Refine it. I put not so much details. You can start to refine. You know, do things like, you know, smudging it. You don't want to go too slick on it. I mean, it's nice to have a bit of roughness. I find, you know, when you're creating this stuff, it's nice to kind of, for it not to be so perfect. If you ever go into sites like Concept Art World, where you've got you know, pro artists who kind of put work on there, there's a lot of loose, you know, there's some stuff that's quite tight, you know, where they're using 3D programs, you know, like ZBrush and 3D Coat and stuff like that, and Maya, and using, you know, renderers like, you know, Keyshot. But with I really like a lot of the. I mean, I love all that stuff, but I also like the stuff where it's really loose, where they've kind of, where the artist has just kind of put suggestions of stuff in there, but not really gone too overboard with the detail. They kind of leave it very, very loose, and I think there's something really lovely about that. It's kind of got a certain energy about it, and you can lose that energy if you start to kind of refine things too much. You lose something in the process. So try not to. Well, it's entirely where you're coming from, but I think when you're doing early stage, when you're at the early stages of doing designs, you know, don't be afraid to kind of just keep it all loose. You know, keep the kind of spirit of your original ideas before going kind of super slick. But like I say, don't get me wrong, I love all that. You know, all the kind of like hard surface type renders and. You know where they kind of do, like, you'll have a cyborg creature, but it's all, they'll be using a lot of the kind of tools and stuff in ZBrush or in 3D Coat for putting, like, you know, circuitry in there, or, you know, armor, and it's all very kind of nicely and tightly done. I love all that stuff. I don't know if I necessarily I can work that way. I think it takes a certain level, you know, a certain level of dedication to kind of do stuff like that. And I'm very much about kind of, I like kind of exploring different ideas. I think I get, there's one thing, I mean, I used to have this, you know, I've had this for a long time, where I have lots of ideas. I'm always kind of brimming with ideas. And I want to explore those ideas. The idea of spending weeks doing a painting, it's like, I've just got so much I want to explore. I'm kind of impatient that way. So yeah, it's just, as they say, use an expression, horses for courses. It just depends where, what floats your boat, as it were. Anyway, so what I'm doing here is I'm just kind of putting some kind of like mountainous areas in the distance. Again, just creating this kind of sense of depth. You could even put, we've got this kind of reservoir water. I mean, it could almost be like, what do they call it? Oh, my brain's gone. Estuary. Yeah, it's like an estuary. So you kind of get these that kind of lead in from the sea, and the sea's probably like way out there, around about here. It's just way out. But inland, you've got this bit where fresh water kind of meets the sea, and the magical kind of places. I know, like here in the UK, you have plenty of places like that. But I suspect you do in other, obviously other parts of the world. But yeah. So all right, I'm just aware of time, and I could quite easily just spend hours on the clouds. I could spend hours, working on the other bits and bobs. I am aware of the fact that the stream may shut down at any time because, as I mentioned, this is my first stream. It will get better. It will get better. It's just I'm gonna have to kind of get through these teething problems. I'm probably gonna have to do a little bit of research online, which I have been doing in the last hour, and just kind of looking at ways to overcome it. I think it seems to be you have to change some of the settings in OBS. That could be part of the problem that's going on. Why it's all gone a bit sort of south. Anyway, so I am aware of time. So I think what I want to do is I'm going to kind of leave the background there. I want to then sort of concentrate on getting the character in with the dragon. So I'm going to create another layer, and I'm going to sort of position it probably around about here. And now on my original it was quite loose. I quite like that. I did think about making it slick and really kind of rendered, but one of the things I really liked about my first take on this is it's got quite an illustrative feel about it. It's quite loose, and as I mentioned earlier, I think there's something endearing about that, about not being so kind of polished. So what I'm doing here is I'm just kind of blocking it in, really. Now this could be a dragon, it could be one of the things that the Nazgul ride around in Lord of the Rings. Who knows, all right? But it's some kind of winged creature. I like dragons, so I think we're going to stay with dragons. We're going to stay away from Lord of the Rings. And I'm going to really just kind of block out the legs. And put in his front legs there as well. Zoom in a little bit. Oops, take that down a bit. Okay. Right. Now this is where it's entirely up to you. Now I've still got this at 200 pixels. Now I could leave it at that. I mean, it's not It's not essential, but I'm tempted almost to bump it up again to 300. It's probably not necessary. Probably all right as it is. Okay, I can put I can put the character on there at, well, one of the kind of last things really. I know where that's going. Right, and what I might do is I might just move that for you. See, this is the beauty of Photoshop, right? Because I work traditionally as well. I do use oils, and I wish I could do this in the real world. Maybe one day we'll be able to do this, but on computers, you know, it's such a treat because you can just, you don't like the position of something, reposition it, put it there. No one's none the wiser. You know, this is like exactly where I intended it to be. You can't, however, kind of do that. I was going to say in the real world. Of course, we're in the real world, but you know, when you're actually using traditional paint, it gets yeah, you just can't do that. And sometimes that's not necessarily a bad thing because you're stuck with the choices you make. Yeah, and you know, it's a little bit like life, isn't it? You know, we all wish we could have Control-Alt-Z with our lives, but that is unfortunately that is not the case. But I say unfortunately, you know, when bad things happen, when mistakes happen, you learn from those mistakes, right? So there is something to be said about making mistakes and then living with those mistakes. Yeah, instead of trying to undo them, is actually learn from them and live and build on them. You know, build on mistakes. Anyway, enough of that. So I'm just again, I'm trying to. I don't want to kind of make this too kind of polished, as I mentioned. I'm going to. There's a little bit of lag going on here. I think this is because I've got the live stream going on, and it's yeah, it's just, you know, I'm on a little MacBook. It's one of the latest MacBook Pros, but it's probably struggling a little bit. It's perhaps not that beefy enough to be able to handle streaming and working in Photoshop at the same time. So again, so just excuse me. So just, I might use the hard brush, or maybe use the brush 14 on that, and take the opacity up on that, and just trying to make it a bit more defined. Yeah. Okay. So again, just using the eraser tool as a brush, really, kind of taking part of the drawing away, part of the painting away, and then painting back into it. So it's just constant like ebb and flow of taking away, adding, that kind of thing. Using the smudge tool. Okay. really just putting a bit of noise in there, kind of create a suggestion of rocks, dirt, you name it. And then I'm going to go through another pass through with the do the same thing again. So I'm just going to use the smudge tool. Sorry, smudge tool. And again, this kind of grass. Okay. So I'm going to just add a bit more definition now. I think I'm going to leave it at I'm going to leave it at 200. I think I just don't want to rock the boat. I'm still very conscious of the possibility of this thing crashing. That's still very real. That could happen. So I don't want to, I don't want to rock the boat on that one. I'm just going to try and finish it and then get out of Dodge, as it were. So just going to start defining some of the little bits like the dragon's leg. Alright, so I'm just checking out. Right, so I've got 4 people watching, which is wonderful. That's great. So I'm just going to stop here for a second. I've got so Grayson. I'm assuming you're still watching. So Grayson's asking, would you say the rules of landscape painting are the same for concept art? How much detail should concept artists focus on? That is a very good question, Grayson, because I mentioned earlier about, when I worked as a concept artist and, when I'm teaching my students at Coventry University, it is a constant thing of like, how far do you go? And I think it's the same with all art, like I say, because I mentioned the fact that I can use traditional materials as well. It really depends on what you're aiming for. You get some artists who are who like to kind of create an impression, so they're more like an impressionist in their approach. So they give a suggestion of the objects that they're trying to depict. So it's really for you and for other artists to kind of really, I'm not trying to kind of avoid the question. I'm just saying that it's really up to you. One thing I would say is that when you're creating a piece of, or if it's like, say for example, it's a landscape painting. certainly you want to be coming from the point of view of creating a very kind of general impression. So if you go online, I mean, you know, don't take my word for it. Just kind of go online and see some of the other artists working on, you know, putting stuff on YouTube. Very often they'll start off with the basics. They'll be putting the values in there. They'll be putting the kind of tones and you know, kind of blocking things out. And then when they've done that, then they start creating details. So, you know, like, for example, I'm creating this kind of dragon character at the moment. And first of all, it's just really just getting, like, okay, let me just get the stuff in there first. I'll just kind of paint in the, you know, the black. And then you start, you know, then you would say, for example, then you'd start kind of, okay, once I've kind of got all that in there, you know, how far do I want to go? Now, it might be that you're thinking, well, hold on a minute. I just want to kind of leave it very, very loose, right? Because I'm just going to go back to, I'm going to go back to my original painting. You see, I liked that. You know, I was kind of doing all this kind of, it was a very quick painting that I did. I mean, I don't know how long it took me exactly. It might have been about an hour or so, something like that. But, and I did think about, you know, okay, maybe I'm going to put some armor on it, and maybe, you know, put some scales on there and start, you know, and this character here, you know, maybe it's got something, I don't know, maybe that's a scarf or maybe it's some kind of cloak, you know, and start putting some details in there. I think, well, I quite like this. I quite like that level of detail. So to answer your question, I think it's okay. Number one, it's what you like, and if you like detail. If you like creating detail, you know, if you're doing like landscape paintings, then yeah, go from the general, then go specific, and do the detail. But know that if you're putting the detail in there, that's going to absorb a lot of time, and it depends on what you're aiming to kind of get done. If you're working as like just like an artist who just kind of wants to sell work, for example, then you know you could potentially spend just weeks. If you want to, you know, but if you're working as a, if you're working for a games company or working for a, you know, on a like Hollywood film, there's a bigger kind of turnaround, so you don't have that luxury of time to be spending weeks. It could even just be a day, maybe even 2 days at a stretch, and then you're meeting with the art director and the director, and you're talking through what you're doing. So it's yeah, it's a bit. I'm sorry to be so vague, but I think it's, you know, it's entirely up to you, you know, how much kind of detail. But you know, the best thing to do is just kind of work and then see what you're happy with. I think that's really it. It's a similar thing with a question I've had before from students is like, you know, when I've been doing concert art, and they'll say, "Oh, what brush did you use? What brush are you using?" I've had this online on my channel. What brush are you using? And I'll say, "Oh, well, I tend to kind of use the same brushes. Really, I don't kind of go in for a variety of brushes." And probably part of the reason for that is laziness. But I think it's because I've just the stuff that I like working with. And I tend to kind of choose that. So there's no like one size fits all kind of approach. It's really about finding your own path. You know, find your own path in this. You know, your own. You know, if you want to have success as an artist, it's about ultimately it's about being inspired by other artists and you know, of course looking at tutorials. But it's about primarily it's about finding your own voice. So anyway, Grayson, if you are still watching this, Grayson the Overcomer. If you are still watching this, I hope that answers your question. But honestly, feel free to ask me anything else. So moving forward, I'm going to really start. I'm just going to be quiet just a second because I want to just get an idea of what I'm doing. See, this is the thing about when you're particularly when you're live streaming, is kind of thinking and working. Thinking, talking, and working at the same time. It's a bit like walking and chewing bubblegum for me sometimes. It's quite difficult. Anyway, all right. Okay, I might just again, I'm not going to go crazy on this. I might just get the lasso tool, and I'm just going to bring this round. So you've got the first wing here, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring it round. What I want to do is almost like create a sense of transparency with this. So I'm just going to use one of the soft brushes, take the opacity down, and not too much, not too much. It's as if the light is, you know, shining through the wing to a certain degree, you know, so you're getting that sense of, you know, this is the wing. Is it could be feathers, it could be scales, but it's probably quite transparent, right? Because when you think about birds' wings, if you've ever seen birds' wings, it's essentially, it's like fingers, right? These are fingers. What you're seeing here, even with a dragon, is what you're seeing are really, in essence, oops, change the brush there, change the color, sorry, and just take up the opacity, are large fingers. Yeah, so you might have a claw there, and then you might have another claw there, and then a series of like one there, maybe one there, and one there, and then stretched in between this is like a kind of, it's skin essentially, it's like membrane, right? And this is what provides the flight, because of course it can't be too heavy, right? So this is why it's good to kind of do research. It can't be too heavy, because you've got the bones, and it has to be lightweight. It has to kind of lift this mass off the ground and kind of get it going. So, you know, although, you know, we're going into the realms of fantasy here, it's good to apply some real world kind of biology in there, some real world, you know, evolution, physics, you know, not too much, because, you know, if you're doing fantasy stuff, it's you know, you got that suspension of disbelief. But if you can make it just like, oh yeah, this could possibly, in an alternate kind of universe, this could possibly be happening. So again, I'm just trying to just kind of loosely putting that in there. All right. Again, I seem to be doing whatever it is, whatever changes I've made with OBS seem to have worked, because it's not crashed, and usually I think at this point it's crashed. So I might have cured it. So we might be in business. And what this means is that if, it depends of course, you know, if you guys like this stuff, but it makes things easier for me if I can kind of do, I don't mind working live, absolutely fine. I don't mind making mistakes, as long as, you know, you're getting something out of it. It just means it can kind of like have a more of a kind of like, you know, kind of hit and run approach, where I can kind of like, I can get in and get out. You know, I can kind of do the tutorial. It may not be as polished, but it will hopefully, I'll be able to kind of, you know, upload a lot more stuff as a result of this. You know, if you know anything about Final Cut Pro or about Premiere Pro, it's quite laborious. You know, the editing side of it, and of course, you know, it's great, but you end up spending a lot of time processing the whole thing, uploading the whole thing, and yeah, and you know, when you've kind of got a busy life, it makes things quite difficult. Anyway, enough rambling. Oh right, okay, yeah, you're welcome, Grayson. Grayson the Overcomer, you're absolutely welcome anytime, mate. Anytime. That's what I'm here for. I love doing this stuff, so feel free to ask me any other questions. Right, so we're getting to the point where I think I might do a bit of work on the head. It looks like fortune has favoured us, and it's not crashed. So I'm going to look to just do a little bit. I'm not going to go crazy on this. Excuse me. I'm just going to do a bit of work on the head. And get the horns in there. But you see, I don't know about you, but you know, whenever, like, I've got, like, you know, quite a few books, you know, like the Art of Doom and oh goodness, what else? My brain's gone. It's all right, because I'm in painting mode. I've got like a ton of gaming books anyway, and also film stuff, like, you know, the Art of say Rogue One and all that. And one of the things I really love is that you just see these sketches that have been blown up, and they just look beautiful. And I kind of prefer those over the polished stuff. It just, I don't know what it is. It's just got life about it. It's just something. I just really love it. And maybe you feel the same. Well, you know, maybe not. But it's all cool. Like I say, I love all that stuff. But I love seeing the artist's lines. I love seeing all that kind of. You see how it evolved, how it kind of came into being, and once it kind of gets polished, you can't see that necessarily. All right. Okay, just going to put some teeth in there. So it's kind of doesn't quite resemble the original, but I quite like the shape of that. It's kind of weird, kind of horn going on there, and of course, you know, you can just keep going with this. I mean, if I wanted to, you know, I could kind of like zone in on this head and do all kinds of stuff, you know, but then we're talking, that's more of a speed painting, right? That's more of like, I'm spending all day doing that and doing the rest of the picture, and I put it into a speed painting and then talk over the top. But when you're doing like a live stream, it's a bit of a different, I'm sure you all love drawing, but you know, to see me just kind of going into like infinite detail is probably, you could probably think of better ways to kind of spend your time. So I want to spare you that, and just really just finish the picture. So I'm just putting put his eye. No, I didn't put an eye in on the other one, on the original, but I quite like the idea of this kind of evil glowing. Well, I say evil, may not be evil, could just be a glowing eye, right? But just makes it look kind of unusual. And then lastly, I'm going to put the little character on top. Okay, so I'm going to change brushes again and put our person, dude or dudette, could be a woman. Put this little character on top there. Okay, so just going to, again, just kind of get, at least just kind of get the main bulk of it in first. And then after I've done that, I can then maybe increase the opacity and just put a bit more. I'll tell you what I might do. I'm going to break my rule. I'm going to take it up to 300 because I just wouldn't mind just putting a bit more detail on the character. So please don't crash. Please don't crash. There we go. Right. Yeah, just a bit more kind of detail with our little character here now. I don't know, you know, what to time frame this is from. It could be it's a parallel universe. It could be fantasy. I've left it purposefully kind of vague, yeah, so you can kind of have this sense of maybe it could even be the future, you never know. Who knows, right? So I might just leave that as a scarf though. I was kind of toying with the idea of having a cape, but I think we'll leave it as a scarf. And just put in a bit of, so imagine it'll have something like a saddle for a horse, which we can't see, right, because it's kind of part of this kind of silhouette, but we could sort of safely assume that this character is maybe a traveller. He's maybe got camping equipment, cooking equipment, and all that kind of stuff. He's almost like got a home strapped to the back of this thing. You know, the straps are kind of going around in, you know, something like that. So like it would be like a camel or a horse, and then you've got like a saddle, right? And so you'd have it'd be something like that, say. And again, you can sort of, when you start doing stuff like this as well, you know, particularly if you want to go into more detail, it can really add a sense of a story, yeah, because that's something else to kind of think about. All right, got another question coming from you, Grayson the Overcomer. Yes, pareidolia, yes. So your pareidolia idea was incredible. Sorry, it's getting cut off there a bit. I'm just can't quite see that. It was incredible. Use your photograph mishmash technique on a piece I did recently. Would you rely on it for thumbnails only, or would you build an entire piece from it? Oh, both. I mean, you know, certainly you would, as coming up with ideas, yeah, thumbnails, right? Because you can have like a very broad general view of what you're trying to create. So for sure, you know, thumbnails. But you can use, you can also use those thumbnails for, of course, and, you know, blow it up and actually work on it in more detail. I don't know if you watch Feng Zhu. I'm sure you do. You know, Feng Zhu, FZD school. Amazing guy. You know, he's got his school over in Singapore, and he's one of the videos he did. It was a few years ago where he did. It was like chaos to control, and he basically did like photo bashing, and did it all in thumbnails. So he kind of created these little scenes where it was just literally any kind of random objects, blurring them, drawing over them, but creating that pareidolia, right? So it's basically seeing familiar shapes in the you know, in the values and in some of the random structures, and then getting ideas. So certainly you can work from the thumbnail, and you might find that when you blow it up, you take that kind of like small drawing, blow it up, all of a sudden you get all kinds of ideas that start kind of bubbling up. But certainly, I can't remember exactly what video it is. It's worth checking out. But it was, I think it was like Christmas. It was just before Christmas, or it might have been like, oh goodness, it was something like, it was around about just before Christmas 2014, something like that. So it's about 4 years ago, and it's a similar thing with that, you know, that he did. But certainly, yeah, both, right? So yeah, both. I hope that answers your question. But certainly, the pareidolia thing is wonderful. Of course, many artists throughout, you know, history, you know, people like Salvador Dali, for example. If you're not familiar with him, check his work out. Spanish artist, surrealist, where he lived somewhere, some coast of, excuse me, in in Spain. He's got all these rock formations, and they kind of look like faces. And he used those as a basis for a lot of his paintings, you know. And so apparently the reason for pareidolia, I don't know if I know a little bit about it, and it's basically, as human beings, we have a sort of targeting system, like it's wired into us, like since time immemorial. Whereas, you know, from, I guess, going from amoeba through to trilobites, through to, you know, fish, amphibians, and then into mammals, and then eventually into you know, chimpanzees and beyond. These kind of targeting systems that we've got in the brain, where we look to identify things in the world that are familiar to us. And I'm guessing, again, this is where I'm kind of getting slightly out of my realm, but this is essentially, you know, part of evolution, is that we look to identify things. It's a bit like looking at, like, say, a door, and you get the two windows and the door, and maybe a letterbox, and it kind of looks like two eyes and a mouth, yeah, and it kind of looks humorous. That's pareidolia. You're seeing things that are familiar, and it's unusual because it's part of a kind of part of our evolutionary process. So yeah. Anyway, I hope that answers your question, Grayson the Overcomer. Grayson, as well, you know, you do me a great honor. You're the first person in my chat, so thank you very, very, very kindly. This is a yeah, momentous occasion. So, moving forward, I'm going to start to now, oops, put some reins in. So hold down, press click, and then hold down shift and click. Yeah, it's very good for creating straight lines, and then you can sort of do the same thing again with the smudge tool. So just so it's not so, I'll do the same with the other one as well. So he's got the reins on there, and again it just disappears. You just assume that the dragon's got some kind of harness. Okay. Well, I think that's kind of starting to. Yeah, I think that's pretty much. I'm just thinking. Yeah, I think I'll keep it like that. I mean, it's close to the original. I was just having thoughts about kind of shrinking it down, but I quite like where it is. It's kind of. Another thing is, again, when you're kind of doing this stuff, excuse me, have a play around with the, you know, where you want it. You know, you can imagine this thing kind of coming in, flying into view, and then flying off the screen. But, you know, where you're going to sort of position it in the scheme of things. Now, as a general rule, as artists, it's said that, you know, you shouldn't put anything bang on in the middle, and that's probably a topic for another time. That's the golden ratio, right? You've probably heard of this, you know, or the golden rule, and this rule of thirds, as it were. You know, this idea that nature is out of balance. Yeah, so you don't put anything that's symmetrical necessarily. Everything is always slightly out. Like the way I've composed this picture, if I just move that out of the way for a second, like you've kind of got the clouds here, or even possibly a mountain there, and you've got some other mountains there, but everything is kind of off kilter. Nothing is symmetrical. And you find that in photography, and you find that in art. And it's about, again, human beings like things that are slightly off kilter. We like things that are slightly out of balance, because nature's out of balance. And it's what they call aesthetically pleasing, right? So we like things that please the eye. We don't know why. Ultimately, we know why we like things, but sometimes we don't really know why we like things. We like things because it's just the way we like them. Yeah, but that's one explanation. Because I know that for some people, you know, the jury's out with things like the rule of thirds. You know, the golden rule, and it is contested, but there is truth in it. There is truth in it. It's not just empty kind of intellectual kind of speculation. People have studied this. People have written books about it. You know, it is a thing, and it is something to kind of think. It doesn't mean like you live your life by it, and by all means you break the rules, right? Rules are there to kind of be broken in, you know, creatively. But at the same time, you know, you want to at least know those rules before you break those rules. And knowing about things like composition and about balance, these are all good things to know. Anyway, I think we're kind of like slowly kind of approaching the end of this. Now, as a first kind of pass through, I mean, I'm happy to kind of leave this like this. And of course, you know, if I wanted to, I could use that as like, okay, phase 1, that's done with now. And then phase 2 would be, okay, then maybe either later on tonight or tomorrow, I dig into it and actually start really putting some detail in there. I could even, I mean, that's perhaps a tutorial for another time, is start off with, because this is something else that artists do, they'll start off actually blocking it in, so they'll get all the details in. It's a bit like modeling. You know, if you do any modeling out there, any you know, work in Maya or in ZBrush or 3D Coat, they'll kind of block things in and then they go on with the texturing. Yeah, so you could almost treat it like that. And I've noticed a lot of artists, I mean, it's very commonplace now, where they'll get all the they'll do something like this, and then they'll go back into it, but they'll have textures. They'll take photographs. So maybe they'll go and get, you know, obviously, like, you know, make sure it's royalty free, but get things like feathers. Get things like okay, so just for this is perhaps for another time. They'll take that and then they'll leave this as it is. Okay, and then what they'll do is they'll go and get things like scales, feathers, you know, like random images. They'll get leather straps, you know, for the seat here. They'll maybe get some material. Some maybe, I mean, this could be any kind of cloth or leather, and stuff like, they might even get things like I don't know, horns there. It could be like an elephant's tusk or something or other. You know, all these things. And then what they do is they then copy that, you know, cut it out, and then paste it in there, and then work into it, right? But that's perhaps a tutorial for another time, because I think that's a very exciting way of. I mean, that's kind of, a lot of artists are doing this. If you go on things like Concert Art World, they're all doing this. You'll see these wonderful paintings that they do, but they'll probably start off with this as a kind of like, as a baseline, yeah. And then what they'll do is they'll then get all the photographic reference, and then they'll photo bash. They'll kind of put it all into it, yeah. So even things like, you know, water, they'll probably put some water in there. They'll probably get some sky, you know, reference, and they'll put some of that in there and work it into it. They'll get some grass and some stone, and they'll work that into it as well, yeah. So the journey doesn't stop; it kind of continues. But that said, you know, I quite like the charm of this. I think this is ultimately what I'm talking about. Like, this has its place. This has its place. Okay, this has its place, and the detail stuff has its place. Yeah, same thing as like when people are doing the kind of the concept art with all the modeling and the, you know, hard surface kind of, you know, texturing and rendering, you know, when it looks super polished and all that kind of stuff. Everything's got a place in concept art. You see this everywhere. But I quite like this. I quite like just the loose lines here, you know, and it's something that if you've not really experimented with this before, have a play with it. You know, it's great fun. It's got its own charm. And you know, and then, you know, at a later date, if you want to work into it, work into it. You know, it's not, it's nothing set in stone. You know, it's all a work in progress. Anyway, that's it. So, as a last message, so yes, the honor is mine. Glad you're enjoying the tutorials, Grace and the Overcomer. Absolute pleasure having you on board, and please look out for more, because I'm going to see how these go. But if I can kind of do the tutorials more like this, then my output is going to go like 150%. Because one of the things that really weighs you down when you're doing tutorials is the processing time. It's the having to edit the videos, the soundtrack, and all that kind of stuff. Whereas this way, it just completely frees you up, and I've quite enjoyed it, to be honest. I think it's been quite sort of liberating in one way. It's been a little bit of a rocky start, but it's you know, it seems like we are flying like this dragon. We are now flying away. So so that is it. Feel free to leave some comments. Feel free to leave me a like if you've got any questions. Of course, after I've stopped this live stream, you'll be able to still ask some questions. I will get notified. I will get back to you as soon as possible. I do have a bit more time now. With my students have now they're now finished for the summer, so I'm certainly freed up a lot more with my duties at the university. So so yeah, I'm just looking forward to doing a bit more content. I'm hoping to also be digging into some other stuff, like some 3D modeling, like 3D coats, and maybe a bit of Maya as well, and mashing that up with doing some concept art. But we'll see how that goes, and maybe some, well, we'll see how it goes, and then we'll take it as it comes. But that's it. Thank you. So for anyone who's left watching, including Grayson the Overcomer, thanks so much for watching. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been lovely to have an audience. Hope you've enjoyed the tutorial, and that's it. Yeah, see you next time. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.